as of right now, a lot of these people in the media is not keeping it real, specifically Indiana Fever reporters.
The Indiana Fever find themselves at the center of yet another storm. And this time, it's not about wins, losses, or coaching decisions. Secret footage of Caitlin Clark has resurfaced online, sparking outrage, confusion, and a wave of worry among fans. What the video shows, or more importantly, what it doesn't show, has raised serious questions about when, how, and even if the team has been honest about their star player's injury. Instead of calming the chaos, the Fever's front office and trusted reporters seem to have only made things worse.
Obviously, Caitlin Clark has been hurt a while, and now we find out that she has an ankle injury.
With conflicting statements and shaky timelines that simply don't add up. Now, the fanbase is split between frustration and panic, wondering whether Caitlin is being properly protected or unfairly mishandled. And the more this footage circulates, the louder the calls grow for answers the Fever can't seem to provide.
Caitlin Clark aggravated a damn injury because her coach decided her coach stood on her ankle. Her coach stood on her ankle.
The first spark that lit this controversy came from something that should have been simple: the date of Caitlin Clark's injury. According to Indiana Fever insiders and reporters close to the team, the official story was that Clark suffered her setback on August 7th. On paper, it looked like a straightforward update, an unfortunate incident that happened during a workout session. But for fans who pay close attention, the details didn't line up, and soon enough, the cracks in the story began to show.
Are not keeping it real. The people the people with media passes, the people each and every last one of you guys go to for credible information. And as of right now, this is why this league is in the dump the way it is. This is why they cannot get ahead, because they are not credible.
Video footage resurfaced from that exact date, August 7th, when the Fever were playing in Phoenix. In that clip, Caitlin could be seen walking confidently, carrying a large luxury purse, and showing no signs of discomfort. There was no limp, no hesitation, no hint that anything was wrong. To fans watching closely, it looked like Caitlin was completely fine. So how could she have suffered a major injury that same day? The contradiction became too obvious to ignore. This is where the frustration really took off. Fans weren't just upset that their favorite player was sidelined. They felt misled, as though the organization and the media were deliberately giving out misleading timelines to cover something up.
They are not credible reporters. They are not credible at all. I am here to tell you, it is looking real damn spooky.
The idea that reporters like Scott Agnes repeated the August 7th line without pressing harder only fueled the suspicion. Why would a credible reporter go along with an explanation that clearly didn't match the evidence on tape? For a fan base that prides itself on loyalty, this struck at the heart of trust. Caitlin Clark isn't just any player. She's the centerpiece of the franchise and one of the biggest draws in the entire league. When she's hurt, fans deserve clarity and honesty, not conflicting stories and shaky excuses. Instead of transparency, the Fever delivered confusion. Instead of reassurance, they delivered panic. Adding to the mess was the tone used by certain media members when discussing her condition. Rather than treating it with the seriousness it deserved, some clips showed reporters almost laughing through their updates, as if Caitlin's setback was just another headline, rather than a moment that could impact the entire trajectory of her rookie season. Fans picked up on that tone, and it only deepened the anger. The big question became unavoidable. If Caitlin wasn't limping on August 7th, then when did she actually get hurt? Was it later, perhaps during a practice or behind the scenes workout, or was it an incident involving the coaching staff, something the team didn't want to admit publicly? These unanswered questions formed the foundation for growing distrust between the Fever organization and the people who support them. And while the timeline alone was enough to spark outrage, what came next made the situation spiral even further. Because when fans looked deeper into the days surrounding that footage, they uncovered an incident that painted an even more disturbing picture of how Caitlin may have really gotten injured. Once the initial timeline started to crumble, fans did what they always do best. They went searching. Clips from the Phoenix game on August 7th began circulating on social media. And they told a very different story from the one the Fever's front office and reporters wanted everyone to believe. In that footage, Caitlin Clark looked healthy. She wasn't dragging her foot, she wasn't wincing in pain, and she wasn't moving like someone who had just sustained a significant injury. Instead, she strolled confidently, even carrying what many fans identified as a $6,000 Prada bag, flashing her usual calm demeanor. If this was the day she supposedly went down, then the evidence didn't support it. That's where the narrative flipped. The resurfaced video didn't just cast doubt on the official injury date. It suggested that the organization might have intentionally misled the public. Fans began to ask themselves why the Fever would choose to attach Caitlin's injury to that particular game. Was it to hide the real cause? Was it to protect a member of the staff? Or was it simply a matter of spinning the story to minimize backlash? The more this footage spread, the more suspicious the fanbase became. Online forums, Twitter threads, and TikTok breakdowns were filled with fans pointing out the smallest details. The way Caitlin's stride looked normal, the fact that she interacted with teammates with no discomfort, and the way nothing in her body language suggested she had been hurt. If she was fine on August 7th, then clearly the injury had to have happened after that point. But that raised a more unsettling possibility. If the injury wasn't from that Phoenix game, then when did it happen? This is when theories started to emerge about practices behind closed doors. Some fans speculated that it wasn't even an opponent who hurt Caitlin, but a coach or staff member. Those whispers grew louder once people remembered Brian January, the assistant coach, seen stepping on Caitlin's foot in another piece of footage. Suddenly, the resurfaced Phoenix clip became the smoking gun that exposed the timeline as false and redirected suspicion toward the Fever's inner circle. The way the team responded didn't help. Instead of addressing the inconsistencies head-on, they doubled down on their version of events, sticking to the bad step during a workout explanation. That left fans with no choice but to rely on what their own eyes showed them. And what their eyes saw in that video didn't match the story they were being fed. This wasn't just about an injury anymore. It became about honesty, credibility, and the bond between the team and its supporters. Once fans began to believe they were being lied to, the injury update turned into something much larger, a potential cover dash update, and if the resurfaced footage raised doubts, the next piece of evidence would send fans into full-blown outrage, because it suggested the coaching staff themselves might have played a direct role in Caitlin Clark's injury. Once the Phoenix footage went viral, the Fever's official timeline completely unraveled. Fans who had been skeptical from the start now had proof that something didn't add up. But instead of waiting for the team to clarify, the fanbase did what they always do when they feel misled. They became detectives. Clips, screenshots, and timestamps started flooding social media, with people dissecting every angle of Caitlin Clark's recent games and practices. The goal was simple: find the real moment of injury. That search led back to one moment that many fans remembered vividly. In a game shortly after Phoenix, footage captured assistant coach Brian January accidentally stepping on Clark's foot. At the time, it didn't seem like a major incident. Clark brushed it off and kept playing. But with the timeline now in question, fans began to reconsider. Could this have been the true cause of her lingering pain? Could the organization have deliberately shifted the date to avoid admitting a staff member was involved? The more people rewatched the clip, the more suspicious it looked. Clark grimaced slightly, and while she continued playing, her movement seemed subtly affected afterward. The context now gave that moment a whole new weight. Suddenly, what once appeared to be a harmless misstep was being reframed as the turning point in Clark's health. This is where the frustration boiled over. Fans weren't just angry at the possibility of a coaching accident, they were angry at the idea that the team may have tried to bury it. To them, it wasn't just about protecting Caitlin, it was about protecting the image of the franchise. Admitting that a coach had hurt the team's superstar would have been embarrassing. So instead, the front office seemed to craft a different story and hope no one would notice. But fans noticed everything. They compared the Phoenix footage with the January clip, pointing out the inconsistencies. They built timelines that contradicted official reports, highlighting how the supposed August 7th injury didn't match her visible condition. even questioned the motives of media insiders like Scott Agnes, who parroted the official line without scrutiny. The detective work became a movement, and in the process, the Indiana Fever's credibility took another major hit. The narrative now had a life of its own. Caitlin Clark wasn't just injured, she was potentially the victim of organizational negligence and a media cover-up. Every new angle of fan analysis seemed to point to the same conclusion. The truth wasn't being told, and while that theory alone was enough to alarm supporters, what really set people off was the bigger implication. Because if the injury wasn't just bad luck, if it was actually caused by a member of the coaching staff, then it meant Caitlin Clark wasn't just being mishandled. She was being betrayed by the very people meant to protect her, where the story took an even darker turn. Because the next question was unavoidable. Did the Fever's coaching staff actually hurt their own star player? When the possibility first surfaced that Caitlin Clark's injury might have been linked to an incident involving a coach, fans didn't want to believe it. After all, accidents happen in sports. Teammates step on each other. Collisions are part of the game, and no one expects perfection on a crowded court. But the more people replayed the footage of assistant coach Brian January stepping on Clark's foot, the harder it became to dismiss. Combined with the shaky timeline and resurfaced clips, it suddenly looked less like bad luck and more like the detail the Fever desperately wanted to bury. For fans, this was more than just a physical setback. Caitlin isn't just a rookie. She's the face of the franchise, the player bringing national attention to Indiana, and the main reason ticket sales are booming. To imagine that her injury might have been caused by someone within her own organization felt like betrayal. Even if it was an accident, the real issue was transparency. Why didn't the Fever admit it right away? Why create a cover story about an August 7th workout when fans could see with their own eyes that Caitlin was fine that day? The lack of honesty was worse than the injury itself. Then came the deeper suspicion. Many fans pointed out that Brian January had already been caught in tense moments with Clark earlier in the season. There was the incident where she physically pulled Caitlin away from hyping up the crowd, a move that fans interpreted as silencing her personality. To Clark's supporters, it seemed like the staff was constantly trying to tone her down, keep her from shining too bright, or box her into a role that didn't match her natural fire. So when the injury clip resurfaced, the narrative wrote itself. The very people supposed to guide her development might have been the ones responsible for setting her back. What stung even more was how the front office reacted. Instead of treating it as an unfortunate accident that fans could accept and move past, they clung to a shaky version of events that immediately collapsed under scrutiny, that made the fan base believe the worst. If the Fever couldn't admit a coaching mishap, what else were they hiding? Was this about protecting the staff's reputation, or was it about keeping Caitlin under tighter control? Whether or not January's step was the true cause, the damage to trust was already done. The idea that the coaches themselves might have hurt the brightest star in women's basketball created an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. Every interaction between Clark and the staff started being scrutinized. Every word from the front office was doubted. The panic wasn't just about Caitlin's foot. It was about whether she was safe in an environment that didn't seem to value her. Health and honesty, and while the coaching incident fueled fan outrage, the fire only grew hotter once the media's role in all of this came to light. Because if the Fever were hiding the truth, then the reporters covering the team weren't just failing their jobs, they were helping sell the lie. If there's one thing that turned fan frustration into outright fury, it was the role of the media in the Caitlin Clark injury saga. When organizations make mistakes, people expect reporters to hold them accountable. The job of the media is to dig, to question, to uncover. Instead, what Indiana Fever fans saw was something completely different. Reporters echoing the official story without hesitation, even when the evidence in front of them suggested otherwise. Scott Agnes became the lightning rod for this anger. Once clips of him discussing Clark's injury began circulating, fans weren't just irritated by the words, they were outraged by the tone. He repeated the party line that the injury happened at the end of a workout on August 7th, brushing it off as awful luck. But what really set people off was the way he said it, laughing as if the injury was just another minor storyline, not the most devastating news for the Fever's star rookie. To fans, it felt dismissive, almost mocking. How could anyone laugh? About Caitlin Clark being sidelined, the frustration didn't stop there. Fans accused Agnes and others of protecting the front office instead of asking the tough questions. Why didn't anyone press the team about the contradictions in the timeline? Why didn't anyone mention that footage showed Caitlin looking perfectly fine on the supposed injury date? Why didn't anyone consider the possibility that something happened later, perhaps even involving the coaching staff? By ignoring those details, the media came across as complicit in the cover-up for a fan base already suspicious of the Fever's leadership. This was the breaking point. They no longer saw reporters as independent voices, they saw them as extensions of the organization, more interested in preserving relationships than pursuing truth. That sense of betrayal cut deep because fans rely on trusted insiders to give them transparency. Instead, they felt manipulated, and the stakes weren't small. Caitlin Clark isn't just another rookie, she's one of the most followed athletes in the league. Her presence has brought record-breaking attention, ticket sales, and television ratings. With that kind of spotlight, every detail of her career matters. The idea that reporters would shrug off inconsistencies or laugh about her being hurt didn't just seem lazy, it seemed insulting. The fallout was immediate. Social media erupted with calls to boycott certain reporters, with fans demanding accountability. Independent creators and fan-driven platforms started gaining traction, because they were the only ones willing to question the official narrative. The more the mainstream media downplayed the controversy, the more fans turned to grassroots voices for information. And that's where the real panic set in for Indiana. Because when the media can no longer convince fans to trust them, the credibility of the entire franchise begins to collapse. And once trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. But the most damning part was still ahead. Because if the media wasn't just incompetent, but actively helping to mask the truth, then the next logical question was terrifying. What exactly was the Fever's front office trying so hard to hide? By this point, fans weren't just doubting the official injury timeline, they were convinced that the Indiana Fever front office was orchestrating a cover-up. Every piece of information trickling out seemed carefully curated, designed not to clarify, but to confuse. Instead of a straight answer about when and how Caitlin Clark got hurt, the public was fed vague statements about bad luck during workouts and generic updates about progress. It felt less like transparency and more like damage control. The most explosive theory among fans centered on the idea that the Fever had pushed Caitlin too hard, too fast. Early in her rookie season, whispers surfaced that the team wanted her to bulk up to handle the physicality of the WNBA. On paper, it made sense. Bigger frame, stronger body, tougher presence. But adding muscle that quickly can take a toll, especially on joints and feet. Fans began to speculate that the front office pressured Clark into a training plan that her body wasn't ready for, ultimately leading to her breakdown. If true, that meant the very people tasked with protecting their star player's career may have been the ones who jeopardized it. What made this theory feel plausible was the Fever's handling of past situations. This isn't the first time. The organization has been accused of mishandling injuries or failing to protect its players. The franchise's track record with player development and long-term health has often been questioned. For Caitlin, who entered the league with enormous hype, fans expected Indiana to surround her with the best medical resources possible. Instead, they now feared she was stuck with a staff that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability. Even more damning were the whispers about the front office's real motives. Some fans suspected they wanted to control Caitlin's narrative to keep her from becoming too big, too powerful, too independent. The idea was chilling. If Clark became larger than the franchise itself, she might outgrow Indiana. By downplaying her injury, shifting the timeline, and keeping the story in-house, the front office could maintain control. But that illusion of control collapsed the moment fans saw through the contradictions. The distrust deepened with every new leak. Reports surfaced about Clark undergoing additional treatments outside the Fever's immediate care, including hyperbaric chamber sessions and consultations beyond the team's doctors. That raised the question, did Caitlin herself trust the organization's medical staff? Fans openly called for her to return to Iowa's doctors, the people who had guided her college career, rather than rely on Indiana's team physicians. When the fan base trusts outsiders more than the official medical team, it's a clear sign that something is broken. For the Fever, the cover-up wasn't just about hiding an accident, it was about protecting the image of an organization already on shaky ground. But the more they tried to control the narrative, the more obvious it became that something was being hidden. And with the media failing to hold them accountable, fans turned their attention elsewhere. Two independent voices who weren't afraid to ask the questions the front office desperately wanted to avoid. As the Indiana Fever tried to maintain control of the narrative, they ran into a problem they couldn't silence: independent creators and fan-driven platforms. While traditional reporters repeated the team's talking points, YouTubers and Twitter commentators were the ones digging deeper. They slowed down the Phoenix footage frame by frame, compared timelines, and pointed out inconsistencies that the mainstream media ignored. In a way, the grassroots community became the only credible watchdogs in the entire saga. Fans flocked to these voices because they weren't afraid to call out what others tiptoed around. Independent creators openly accused the Fever of lying, questioned the motives of reporters like Scott Agnes, and highlighted moments that suggested a coaching mishap caused Clark's injury. This raw, unfiltered honesty resonated with an audience that already felt betrayed by official sources. Instead of being talked down to with vague updates, fans finally had people who were willing to say what they were thinking. The Indiana Fever cannot be trusted. This shift exposed a bigger issue within women's basketball: the tension between access journalism and independent media. Traditional reporters rely on teams for press passes, interviews, and behind-the-scenes access. That dependence makes it difficult for them to challenge organizations directly, because one tough question could cost them their seat at the table. Independent creators, on the other hand, don't owe the franchise anything. They thrive on controversy, speculation, and fan engagement. And in this case, that independence allowed them to uncover what the corporate press refused to touch. The result was a credibility war. On one side stood the Fever and their aligned reporters, insisting that Clark's injury was just bad luck and that everything was being handled. On the other side stood fans and creators, armed with video evidence, timelines, and unanswered questions, and the more the official voices tried to dismiss the speculation, the more fans rallied behind the independent ones. After all, if the mainstream outlets were telling the truth, why did their stories keep changing? Why did the dates not line up? Why did the footage show something entirely different? This battle wasn't just about Caitlin Clark's foot, it was about control of the narrative. For years, franchises and their chosen insiders dictated the storylines around players. But the internet has shifted that balance. Fans now have the tools and the platforms to challenge what they're told. And in the case of Caitlin Clark, it was the outsiders, not the insiders, who held the most convincing receipts. That dynamic terrified the Fever. Because once fans start believing creators over credentialed journalists, the franchise loses its grip on public perception. Trust doesn't just disappear, it transfers. And in this case, it transferred to a new generation of commentators determined to keep the organization honest. But as the independent voices grew louder, another question began to dominate the conversation. If Indiana couldn't be trusted to protect Caitlin Clark now, what did that mean for her future with the franchise? By the time fans pieced together the resurfaced footage, the coaching incident, and the front office's shifting narratives, one question began to overshadow everything else. Should Caitlin Clark even stay in Indiana? What started as frustration about a single injury spiraled into a full-blown trust crisis. It wasn't just about how she got hurt, it was about whether the Fever had the competence or the integrity to protect the most valuable player in women's basketball today. Clark entered the WNBA with more hype than any rookie in recent history. She wasn't just another draft pick. She was the face of a movement, the spark behind sold-out arenas, record television ratings, and an entirely new wave of fans. For Indiana, she was supposed to be the cornerstone of their rebuild. But instead of building a foundation around her, the franchise now finds itself accused of mishandling her health, misleading its supporters, and shielding its staff from accountability. For many fans, that's not a sustainable relationship. The idea that a coach may have stepped on Clark's foot, whether accidental or not, and that the organization scrambled to cover it up, is damaging enough. But what truly rattled the fanbase was the realization that the Fever seemed more concerned about optics than Caitlin's well-being. That's where the panic comes in. Because if the team won't be fully transparent now, what happens the next time she gets hurt? What happens when the stakes are even higher? Some fans are already calling for Caitlyn to distance herself from the Fever as soon as possible, suggesting that she deserves a franchise that treats her like the superstar she is. Others argue that she has the power to force change from within, using her influence to demand accountability and improvements in how the organization operates. Either way, it's clear her future in Indiana is no longer secure in the minds of the people watching. What complicates things further is how quickly distrust spreads. Once fans lose confidence in an organization, every mistake gets magnified. Every awkward interaction with a coach becomes suspicious. Every vague injury update feels like another cover-up. The Fever aren't just fighting to protect Caitlyn's health, they're fighting to salvage their reputation. And right now, that fight isn't going well. The resurfaced footage didn't just reopen questions about one injury, it reopened questions about whether Indiana can be trusted to lead the league's brightest star into the future. And if they can't, then the clock is already ticking on Caitlyn Clark's time with the franchise. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about basketball. It's about trust, safety, and respect. And if the Fever can't provide those things, then Caitlyn's future in Indiana doesn't just hang in the balance. It may already be slipping away, and that looming uncertainty leads us directly into the conclusion where the Fever's biggest fear becomes clear, losing not just Caitlyn's health, but Caitlyn herself. The Indiana Fever thought they could control the story, but the resurfaced footage of Caitlyn Clark exposed more than just a shaky timeline, it revealed a franchise in panic. Fans aren't just questioning when she got hurt, they're questioning whether the Fever can be trusted at all between conflicting reports, suspicious media coverage, and theories that a coach may have played a role. The damage to credibility is undeniable. What should have been handled with honesty has instead spiraled into a storm of speculation and anger. And now, the conversation isn't just about an injury, it's about Caitlyn's future in Indiana. If the Fever can't protect their brightest star, then how long before she looks for a new beginning? Elsewhere, one thing is certain, the fan base won't forget, and this scandal may define the Fever for years to come.